Hi, my name is Macy Gotchel, and this is my Golden Age presentation on Annie Get Your Gun. Um, because this musical is based off of a historical character, I thought it'd be very important to actually know who she was. So, Annie Oakley was your backwoods girl, kind of. She grew up in Western Ohio, and she used her shooting skills to hunt game for her family to sell because they were very impoverished. So she did that, and obviously she became known for her sharpshooting skills because of who she was selling her game to. Um, Important thing to note is when she meets Frank, which is 1875, and this occurred when a hotel keeper, um, Frank bet a hotel keeper that he could beat any local in a shooting contest, and the hotel keeper suggested Annie Oakley, which took Frank by surprise, but Annie Oakley had a perfect score when they did the shooting contest. She got a 25 out of 25, while Frank got a 24, so she won. Um, as I said, Frank lost, and they eventually married after this interaction. After, of course, they get married, she actually gets discovered by Buffalo Bill, and she joins the Wild West show. Um, Originally, her and Frank were a duo, but once Frank realized that she was more talented than he was, he kind of stepped back. He took a managing position, or if he was participating in the shows, he was throwing the targets for her. So in the case, as seen on the slide, I discovered the example of glass balls, or balls. I'm sorry. I thought it'd be cool to see a video of the real Annie Oakley in action, so here's a quick little video. So I thought that was super cool to see. I think it's also important to note the differences between her real self and the character she's kind of portrayed as in the show. So she's still your backwoods girl who's really good at shooting because of the fact that she provided for her family. However, in this case, she's more prideful with it all. When she meets Frank the same way. The hotel keeper kind of bet, if you will. But like I said, she becomes his adversary rather than his wife right away. Still the same thing is that she's famous for her shooting skills, but as I said, she's more prideful. She's larger than life, if you will. She kind of values her skill very. She kind of prioritizes her skills over other things. In reality, I read that none of this is true. She's actually known to be very humble and kind and very ladylike off stage, if you will. And a fun fact that I discovered was that she was an advocate for women's rights, which makes sense considering the lifestyle she lived, kind of defying the odds, being a female sharpshooter. So the plot line for the film or production, Annie Get Your Gun, is kind of as follows. We obviously meet the main character, Annie Oakley, and she's recruited because of her, excuse me, sorry. She's recruited because of her shooting skills by Buffalo Bill. And this is only after she beats Frank in that match that the hotel keeper kind of organized. The competition between her and Frank are kind of the driving force of the show, and they create tension. And I have tension in quotation marks because it's tension in two ways. It's that competitive tension that they want to be the better shooter than the other. But the other tension is kind of an attractive tension. There's some smittenness between the two, and that kind of creates conflict for Annie, and that's what we have to watch her go through. Closer to the end of the story, we see that Annie does end up like realizing that she has true affection for Frank. So to win his love, she loses a shooting match, and this isn't until she gets wisdom from Sitting Bull in the song "You Can't Get a Man with a Gun," and she kind of has to reprioritize her situation. In the end, Annie gets her man, and Frank has acknowledged her talents and views her as an equal. This is kind of the same thing I just said. Obviously, our introduction is when we meet Annie as our backwoods girl and our main character. The conflict driving the whole thing is the tension between her and Frank. The resolution is when she makes that sacrifice of her skill for the sake of love, and like her success is kind of put on the back burner, if you will. And in the conclusion, everyone in the film is united. Her and Frank have like discovered each other's affection for each other. They view each other as equals. Their relationship ends up being a success. But on the slide here, I've noted that the song that "There's No Business Like Show Business." It's kind of the song at the very end of the musical that brings the cast together and kind of puts an ode to how shows and all that can bring people together and kind of the mindset it gives stage productions in general. So it's kind of an ode to all of theater. Excuse me. I'm going to pause the video so I can cough. Sorry about that. Now let's talk about character development. So the first character we're obviously going to talk about is Annie herself. And in the stage production in the film, you see her more as your stubborn woman, and she eventually transitions into a woman who values the idea of love over the idea of success. And on a more general note, you see her transition from your hillbilly country girl to a famous performer. Let's see, get it going again. There we go. The second character I'm going to kind of acknowledge is Frank himself. At first you see Frank, he's kind of very full of himself and he knows that he's good. He kind of uses that for how he carries himself. I also think he has this underlying self-consciousness, which is why he becomes an adversary to Annie. He's like intimidated by her success, as it were. But by the end of the musical, you see that he views her as an equal and that he realized that love does come first instead of success. The themes for the show, obviously, if you've never seen the show, but just reading the plot line, you could probably pick out that female empowerment is a very prominent theme in this show. Annie's living in a man's world, as I said, very testosterone ridden, because you don't see many famous female sharpshooters in the time that this is set. So there's that for you. I've noted competition and rivalry. Not really as because it's like a life lesson you should take away from this, but because it is the driving force of this production. If you don't have that driving force, then there's going to be no plot development. So that's why I've noted the rivalry between Annie and Frank. The last theme I've noted is love and sacrifice, and it has to do with the resolution that Annie has, that she needs to sacrifice her success for love based off of what Sitting Bull has said to her. I thought it'd be important to note some important in the making statistics, if you will. So the idea was originally proposed by Dorothy Fields, and she would later write a book with her husband Herbert about this same situation. The production was produced by the Rodgers and Hammerstein, which is kind of why you see dance and song moving the plot along, just as it did in Oklahoma and Carousel. And then the music and lyrics were by Irving Berlin in the end. And I said after Fields and after Kern because originally they had Jerome Kern, so sorry, to do the lyrics and the music, but he sadly passed away. I have after Fields also on here because Dorothy Fields was going to take that role, but they ended up choosing Irving Berlin. The second thing I want to note for the in the making is the kind of, it's not going. Okay. The second thing I want to note is your production costs and the gross. So the film, the 1950 film, which is what most of these pictures are from, because that's the version I've seen, it cost over $3 million to make, but it grossed over $8 million. So you could tell that it was a success. The original stage production cost $300,000. I just thought that'd be important to note because obviously there are stage renditions of this, and it was originally a stage production. Some techniques that were used. In a general sense, the music and the dance was used to move along the plot or create a development for the characters, and that's kind of what Rodgers and Hammerstein became known for, as I said, in Carousel and Oklahoma, as we've done an evaluation on those. And the film itself was shot in Technicolor, which was revolutionary for the time, so I thought that'd be important to note as well. Anything You Can Do is the song I decided to do an analysis on. The scene itself is kind of your little playful rivalry between Annie and Frank, um, a little battle of the sexes, if you will. And its importance is just that it has that gender equality kind of issue present. So now we're going to watch a bit of the song Anything You Can Do, I Can Do Better from the 1950 film. Pleasure to give you a listen. So that's always a fun little clip to watch between the two because they really do go into almost anything that you can compete. I mean, even things you can't really compete with another person in. They kind of go back and forth to claim that they can do better at it. All right. Now we're going to talk about what was happening in society during the making of this musical. So this musical was written in 1946. So that's after World War II and much farther after the Great Depression, which was the 1930s. However, both of which I believe play a role in the kind of themes and progression of this show. So after the Great Depression, you're going to have a booming economy. Middle class can finally use their money for more pleasure purposes rather than just necessity. So they're able to afford to go to stage productions and all that. So I think that results in kind of a shift in what characters you kind of write for the audience to root for and the plots that you get to relate, because you want your audience to kind of relate to who's on stage, so they actually feel the urge to root for them. Post World War II, as I said, because it ended in 1945, I think that has to do with romanticizing patriotism and like American national pride, all of that, which, I mean, just like in Oklahoma, kind of taking you back to the roots of the Wild West. I think you also see the spiked number in female protagonists. Annie's obviously our protagonist in this film. And I think it has to do with kind of the concept of when the men went over to fight during the war, women stayed and like kind of filled those more masculine positions or roles, if you will. So that's why I pictured Rosie the Riveter on the screen. It kind of just shows that the women kind of took hold, if you will, and kind of the positions that men never really would have expected them to. Now we're going to talk about reception, just kind of as one of our final topics. Obviously, I think it was fairly well received, obviously on the women's side of the spectrum. Obviously, after World War II, they would have had stepped up, and they probably were at least had some pride for themselves, like being, hey, like we can do this, all that good stuff, women's rights. The men on the other side, maybe not, because like just how you see in, for example, the movie League of Their Own, when you have your first female baseball team, they weren't exactly well regarded at first because they believed that only the men should be playing baseball. So I think it's kind of a similar thing if we look at how the genders receive them. But as a general public, I think it was well received given the fact that like the film itself, like the amount that it made, it was, quite a difference from what the cost it was to make. And then I also noted the runs. They had over 1,100, so if it's going to keep it running, it must have been decent. The cultural impact, as we said before, is you kind of have those strong female leads, and you have that American patriotism. And I do think that it does still have ongoing relevance because of the empowerment and battle of the sexes that we can still see going on in today's society. I've noted enemies to lovers plotline because I think in today's society we see that very frequent in shows and books and all that. And I think that this is probably one of the first shows on stage where you really see, Oklahoma obviously has it as well, but I think you see it in this one even more so. They're adversaries at first, but in the end they end up, finding love with each other. On a more technical sense, Broadway's evolution was from your reviews to your musicals that use music and dance instead of just pure entertainment to kind of move the plot along or create that development in the characters. So this specifically talks about Oklahoma and Carousel. The quote itself is from encyclopedia.com, so feel free to read that and pause this if you would like. These were my sources of research. So that concludes my presentation. Thank you for watching.